I had known of the term helicopter parent before, but I know that you like to call it helicopter culture. Why do
Right.
you prefer?
Yeah. Why do I prefer it? Thank you for
And what
asking it.
is it?
Right. Well, people think that I'm anti-helicopter parent, or that free-range kids are now Let Grow is the nonprofit that I founded about a year ago with some other great people, including Jonathan Haidt and Dr. Peter Gray. And anyways, between free-range kids and Let Grow and me, none of us are blaming parents, because when you live in a culture where you're going to let your kid go up the elevator and somebody's going to say, really? That seems dangerous to me. How can you not helicopter? When you live in a culture where sometimes, it's rare, but sometimes a parent gets, chastised or even investigated for letting their kid walk to the park. When I've heard from schools as far away as Kentucky, where if the kid gets off the bus in the afternoon and there's not an adult waiting to walk them home, no matter if it's 2 blocks or 2 houses, there has to be an adult there. And if there isn't, 3 times, and they have to first of all, they won't let the kid off the bus, and secondly, they take him back to the bus depot, which seems far less safe than letting him walk home 2 houses. But they take him back to the bus depot, and 3 times and you're out, they report you to Child Protective Services as being negligent. So how can you not helicopter in a culture that seems to conspire to act as if all children are in danger all the time, and therefore they need constant supervision? So you're stuck. I mean, really, Let Grow's whole goal is not just to change person by person. That's really hard. It's to change the culture. It's to change the laws, the norms, the whole culture of a school, the whole culture of a town, to have states go, free range, Let Grow. So we really have to have a culture shift away. And sometimes, I'm sorry, I'm rattling on, but
That's okay. We were talking about.
I just have one last analogy, which I guess because I was talking to these people this morning, but, a culture can lose its way on some things and really become convinced that something is good that other cultures realize is not good, and that even before and after that bubble, people will go and think, what was happening? And you think about, the Chinese used to do foot binding. You take a foot, you break it, you mold it into a tiny little foot that's really hard to walk on. And that was considered beautiful and graceful and something that you wanted for your girls in a certain era, in a certain place. And now we look and we go, what? You're crippling the kids. How did you get that idea? But in Victorian England, you couldn't have a piano sitting there without something covering the legs, because the legs were so sexy. I mean, we go through weird moments of believing that things are right that aren't, and the belief that our kids need constant supervision, that they can't do anything safely on their own, that they can't be doing anything successfully, that they can't learn anything without it being a teachable moment with somebody there who's an adult didactically teaching them. All this stuff is wrong. And at some point, we will breathe a sigh of relief when we realize, we don't have to do all that. And nobody's going to get down on me or blame me if I don't. So that's the perspective that we're trying to get to.
So helicopter culture is essentially just overprotectiveness and parents that are all over their kids all the time, 24/7.
Right, but it's not the parents again. It's the culture that's making the parents be all over the kids. If you must wait at the bus stop and walk them home, it's going to look like, oh my God, he's 9, let him walk home already, but you can't. So it is a culture that's decided that the dangers are too great to give kids any independence, and they refuse to see, or it refuses to see, the danger of a zero risk society, or of not allowing kids to have some adventures, take tiny risks, solve some problems on their own, because that would mean stepping back, and we're just told you're not allowed to step back, not for a second. People yell at parents who look at their phone, when they're at Starbucks, instead of engaging their child every second and saying, look, I'm using a napkin. Napkin starts with N, it's 2 syllables, and if you spell it backwards, it's just, give us a break. Give kids a break. Some things, what did I just read? A great line from this school that I was at that said, you learn from everything. It's not just learning from your parents or your teachers or your coaches or being taught. You learn from looking at nature, you learn from being bored, you can learn from television, you can learn from your friends, you learn from doing a puzzle, you learn from doodling. I mean, there's nothing you do that you're not learning something from, except possibly Candy Crush. But most things are giving you some input, and it's hubris to think it's only when parents or teachers are teaching our kids that they are learning anything valuable, and the rest of the time is wasted. It's just not true.
So when did helicopter culture start?
You'd think I would know. There's so many. There's a couple of different threads I can talk about in terms of fearing for our kids, being in danger all the time from like predators. I'd say that really kicked in with the milk carton kids. I don't know how old you are, but do you have any idea what I'm talking about when I say the milk carton kids?
Oh, yeah, we don't have that anymore, but for sure,
Right.
The missing children on the milk cartons.
Right. That started in 1984, and that was a big cultural thing to happen across America. You're eating your Rice Krispies, and you look up, and there's a child, and it says, "Have you seen me?" Missing, the missing. And then for a while at my local grocery store, you were checking out, and there would be a video playing, the missing, the lost. And it just felt like every child was in danger of being snatched off the streets. No one ever explained that the vast majority of the missing children were taken in custodial disputes between divorced parents, or they were runaways. And the idea of a stranger snatching a kid was and remains the rarest of crimes. To even the people who put the pictures on the milk cartons now say, we're really sorry we spread the idea of stranger danger, because that's looking in the wrong direction. So I think the milk cartons, along with the sort of obsession on the part of the news with the story, if they could find one, of a white middle class or upper middle class kid who was taken by a stranger, this just became such gold for the budding cable news industry. And then, of course, it's bled into the social media and Facebook and stuff. I think that made us very afraid that anytime, your kid is safe because you're watching them, and you turn to pay, you turn to look at your phone or do something else, and you turn around and they're gone. I mean, people really believe that. Like, I've heard from parents who were screamed at. They had their kids at IKEA sitting at a table eating the meatballs, and the mom went to get a few more meatballs or napkins or something, and she came back and somebody's screaming at her, your children could be taken. And I heard from a grandma who was in an allergist's waiting room, and she was so old she was using a magnifying glass to read the newspaper. And so this little 3-year-old comes over, and she's saying, see, you look through here and the letters get big and then they get small. And the mother snatched the kid away and said, he has to learn, fast not to talk to strangers. I mean, that kind of hysteria that everybody is about to hurt your kid, even the grandmother in the allergist's waiting room, who presumably has signed a little sheet with her name, you'd know who took the kid. That's one side of what has changed in our culture, the idea that they're in constant danger from predators. But there are other threads going on, and one of them is this is a weird one that I'm just sort of groping my way towards recently. But I was talking to a religion professor last week, Alan Levinovitz. He's down at James Mason University in Virginia, and he said that it's not that religion has disappeared from modern life, not at all, but it's the area of our life that it covers is shrinking. And so it used to be that religion decided what you ate, who you could marry, what you wore, who was good, who was bad, who got to speak. I mean, it covered a lot of decisions. Wow. That wasn't a gunshot. That was a motorcycle. But those scare me too. Anyways,
that's okay.
The point is that as its authority over, group shrank, the area that was left was for all of us to personally decide what's good, what's bad, what's safe, what's not safe. And we don't really know. I mean, in a way, religion gave you a pass to understand that, like, if something bad happens, it is God's will, or you can't possibly understand, the entirety of the universe. But now it's all on us. And it's all on us because we have so much more ability to know everything that's going on in our kids' lives than any human has ever had. You know, we can tell where they are and what they ate and how many steps they took and what their blood oxygen level is. I mean, there's monitors for everything. And that's a huge burden because suddenly you have omniscience and you feel like, well, if I know everything that they're doing, you know, if anything bad happens, it's because I wasn't paying enough attention. So between sort of the God sphere becoming a little constricted and the ability of parents to know all becoming, you know, magnified beyond any human capacity until now, it just puts this burden on parents. And the more you feel you're in control and that you should know everything so nothing bad happens, the more you feel you have to, you know, watch and hover. And the more other people will blame you if something bad does happen because, you know, you could have been, you know, GPSing them, you could have been listening in on their phone calls, you could have read their texts. So it's the idea that we have complete control, or we could have complete control over our children, that's making us crazy.
So it's almost like because you have the ability to know what's going on with your kids more, you should take advantage of that if you're going to be a good parent.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Think about how people get so mad when something bad does happen to a child rather than the sympathy and the communal suffering and empathy that this could happen to anyone. Remember that kid fell in the gorilla cage and Harambe had to be killed?
Yes.
It was like, good job, Mom. You know, you take your kid. Of course they're going to fall into, you know, why aren't you watching them? Of course they're going to fall into a gorilla cage. It's like, if it was that easy for kids to fall into gorilla cages, first of all, there would have been a lot of them before. Secondly, nobody would go to the zoo, right? So obviously it was an anomalous, weird situation, but we immediately go like, well, I would have been spending more, you know, I would have been paying more attention. I would have seen every single step. I would have never glanced away. I would have never, you know, gone to get the graham crackers and turned around. I would have been like this. And that's a tough culture to live in as a parent, not to mention as a kid.
You talk about, I mean, so other reasons why people are so paranoid now, and one of the big ones you emphasized was media that you talked a little bit about already. You know, the news and TV shows, and you talked about the 24-hour news cycle now, and how, I think here of us at this show, we tend to agree, and this is one of the reasons why we're doing the show, is that in order to fill 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you can't help but be alarmist and
if you want anyone to watch.
Exactly. And when you're in that ratings war with other 24/7 news cycles, you have to be as exciting and dramatic as possible.
Yeah, and yet I'm going to go all wonky on you again and say, and there's something about that news cycle. It's so repetitive. So first of all, your brain works. It's not a rational brain. It's a rational brain, but it's not built for 24-hour input of the worst stories from around the world. So first of all, when you see a sad thing, each time you see it, it's almost to your brain as if it just happened again and again and again. You could be watching the Elizabeth Smart story, and it's like it happened 22,000 times. And then your brain works like Google. So if you ask your brain, is it safe for my kid to wait at the bus stop? The easiest stories to retrieve, it's called the availability heuristic, you probably know that, are the ones that sort of seared themselves with video and pictures and emotion in your brain. So up comes J.C. Dugard, taken from the bus stop and kept captive for 18 years. Up comes Eitan Pates, taken from the bus stop and not seen again. I mean, so they're easy to picture, and they are they're the top of their search results. But your brain thinks that because they're so easy to retrieve, and there they are, that they're the most relevant. And they're not. They're actually, in a way, the least relevant because they're such outliers that you remember them, because you're not going to remember the 120 million children who went to school today and waited at a bus stop, bored, cold, whatever, fidgety, and got on the bus and then came home and had a snack. So So when you have media feeding you the worst possible stories from the widest swath in, from the world, you're going to be filled with almost just your odds are going to be completely out of whack. And there's something else I wanted to say about watching TV and so many hours. Oh yeah, and I back to the religion thing. It sometimes feels like you watch those things, and that feels a little superstitious to me too. On the one hand, you're sort of sanctifying the sorrow. You're not glancing away. It's a way of paying respect, but it's also prophylactic. Like I'm watching this so it won't happen to me. It just feels like it's a little bit of you watch out of horror, sorrow, fear, and a little bit of I've done my time watching this. Now, please God, don't let that happen to me. It just feels like it's all a bundle of emotions, fears, atavistic fears. And the other thing about media is that until like 200 years ago, when photography started, or however many it is, 175 years ago, whatever it is, anything that you saw that was scary or awful was right near you. It was something in your immediate vicinity. There was a tarantula or a mountain lion or lava spewing, and so you took that information in, and you knew that that's very dangerous. Never eat that plant. Your cousin ate it, foamed at the mouth, and died. And so every fear that you saw, everything that was scary, was relevant to your life. And we still have those brains because they can't change that fast from 2 million, from 3 million years or whatever of evolution and versus 200 years. And so your brain is taking all this stuff in, but it is not in your immediate vicinity, and it is not of immediate. It's not an immediate threat, but it feels like it is.
Right. You also talk about experts.
Yeah, I do. So I try not to be an expert. I think I'm probably sounding like more. Somebody told me I sounded professorial the other day, and I thought, oh my God, I must just sound old. Yeah, well, experts. I mean, usually I have my magazines over here. Experts, have to tell you're doing something wrong, or otherwise, why do you need them? And so they just come up with, worry after worry and thing you're doing wrong and saying wrong. Somebody wrote on Twitter today, is there anything that you can do that somebody has not written an op-ed about why you shouldn't do it? There was just an op-ed about don't ask your child what they want to be when they grow up. And I actually thought the op-ed was kind of nice. It was like, because you love them for who they are, not whether they're going to become, a lawyer, God forbid. But do I really think that asking some kid, you don't know what to say to him, I'm always awkward around kids. It's like, what do you want to be? I don't think that's telling them that they're no good unless they are thinking in terms of their career and, what SAT scores they should get. But experts are there telling us, think about this thing, think about that thing. You're never supposed to say to your kid, wow, what a good draw. You're a great artist. I love that doodle. You have to say, I see you spent some time, or I applaud your effort, or good job. You can't say good boy. And it's like everything, there's a chapter in my book, not every little thing you do has that much impact on your child's development. But the experts are there to tell you, yes, it does. Watch out. And, there are also experts who I think are fine and telling you to unwind. So it's not like every person who's giving advice is giving bad advice. I don't believe that. But there is a lot of nattering at you.
And there's so much media and content out there. I mean, I'm sure there are some people that, hey, they have been studying these things for a long time and they do know something, you could learn something from them. But, I know because I actually used to run an online site with articles that if a website owner wants to, they can publish anything and make it look good and make it look legitimate. And that's probably very confusing for a lot of parents and just people.
It's if I could change everything in our culture that I want to change, one of the things I would change is like, here's 10 ways to, or here's 10 tips for when you're thinking of, walking out the door. You get so used to getting information that you think you need information. I mean, you can probably raise your kid without reading a single issue of Parents Magazine. You could probably ask your mother-in-law, what age can I give him fruit? And she'll tell you because she got your husband to mating age. And so, we think that it's sort of, you get so used to being told not only how to do something, but the very best way to do it, that you think if you just muddle through, that might be bad or even dangerous. And most cases, it's not. So there is something a little oppressive about the idea that there is an expert for everything from how to brush your hair to, when to say good morning, probably in the morning.
Another reason you brought up that I thought was really interesting on why we're so paranoid these days is how litigious of a society we have become. And I had never thought of that before, but I think it's so true.
Yeah. So here's a story from last Wednesday night. I was at a dinner party, and this grandma was telling me, she found out what I do. Oh, I have a story for you. Okay, let's hear. Her grandchildren, who were 12 and 14, boys, went to it doesn't matter that they're boys, it matters that they're 12 and 14, went to the Museum of Natural History the other day. It was a day off of school, and they were turned away. And she was mad about this, and so was I. It's like they were turned away because they weren't there with an adult. It's like, first of all, don't 1 trillion children go to the Museum of Natural History? Isn't that what it's there for? And isn't it an educational institution? And aren't they humans? And, how dare they turn away 2 curious young people who have the wherewithal to actually get themselves to a museum and go study the dinosaurs, evolution, gems, whatever. It's a great place to go, and it's a safe place to go. And so as I was empathizing with her, yeah, that's an outrage. She said, well, no, you can sort of understand. I'm like, no, you can't. She said, well, I'm sure that the museum was worried about, that they're liable. I'm like, they have 1 million kids there every, like a year. I mean, like that's all, it's just swarming with kids. She said, yes, but those children, she's talking about her own grandchildren now, didn't have an adult with them who would be legally responsible for them if I'm like, how come you were just recognizing how unfair it is to turn these blossoming young men into babies who are not allowed to crawl into the museum. And now suddenly, even she was saying, well, let's think about this legally. Maybe it doesn't make sense. So when I talk about a litigious culture, it's not just that things actually get to court, stupid things like, dry cleaners being sued for ruining a pair of pants, which somebody did for like $2 million. I'm talking about, really, it was in D.C. It's an amazing case. But I'm talking about how we absorb it. And then you think like, well, of course we need 5 chaperones on the field trip, and of course we can't have a trampoline in the yard, and of course we should probably get rid of, it was Richland, Washington is the example I often give. They got rid of all their swings on their playground because, something bad could happen. But at some point, and another school I was at recently got rid of their jungle gym because a kid had fallen and broken an arm. And so when a litigious society starts not only looking at things through the lens of risk, but saying that nothing is an accident that can't be blamed on someone. And so we better be doing defensive everything, defensive parenting, defensive building, defensive playgrounds. And pretty soon, nothing seems safe, even things that are very safe. Jungle gym is not perfectly safe, but the whole idea is to climb. And sometimes when some people climb, somebody's going to fall. So should nobody climb? That's sort of where we're getting to.
Right. I mean, I feel it myself, and I guess I had never thought of it in relation to parenting, but as a business owner, I'm constantly thinking about and paranoid about lawsuits, and you'll learn about laws that you didn't even know about that affect you and your business. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, how can I keep up with this? You do your best. You try so hard to be good at what you do or be a good parent, but or I guess in these cases, like the organizations, you want to have a playground for kids.
Girl Scouts have the girls, they have to have one knee on the ground when they're toasting marshmallows so nobody falls in the fire. I mean, you're really thinking, I forgot to talk about this at the beginning, the whole idea of how would you feel if he never came home? That being the immediate question that we go to when you admit letting your kid do anything independently. That is what I call worst first thinking, which is coming up with the worst case scenario first and proceeding as if it's likely to happen. And that is very much a litigious way of thinking too. What could possibly go wrong? I mean, there used to talk about there were 140,000 children's sweatshirts recalled. This is already about 3 years ago, not because of drawstrings, which is all the time, but because the zipper on the end of one sweatshirt had fallen off, posing a choking hazard, of course. And so then, the fact that probably nobody would choke on it. I mean, it probably just fell to the ground. But the fact that now the company knows that there's a possibility of this little thingy falling off a sweatshirt means that if, God forbid, it ever falls off again and somebody, chokes or pokes their eye out or snorts it, whatever, they would be responsible because they knew that there was the possibility of this thing falling off, and they didn't, immediately recall the 140,000 sweatshirts, so they did.
Where do you think this has come from, this thing in us to blame and sue?
It feels very fearful. It feels like, everything is defensive, like you have to worry that something bad is going to happen or somebody's going to blame you. And I'm not sure. It feels like this conflation of a lot of things. I mean, we are in a litigious society and experts are there. There's a lot of money in childhood right now because there's smaller families and often two parents working. And so where there's a lot of money, then a lot of things flow in, whether it's advice or products. And all of that advice or products has to be sold to parents by telling them, if you don't do this or buy this or read this or make this or get this or, something this, your child is in danger. So, it's partly the marketplace. It's partly the litigious culture. It's partly the constriction of belief in like a greater, being that's making things happen, so you don't have to be so personally worried or feeling that you'll be blamed. And then there's a man named Frank Furedi, which is Furedi, who wrote a book called he wrote a book so long ago called Paranoid Parenting. So he was like the first one. It was in 2002. But most recently he wrote a book I'm looking over at my bookshelf called How Fear Works. And the point that he made 2 points that made a lot of sense to me, and I don't know if they answer your question or not. But one of them is that, we used to think of kids as pretty hardy, that they were, they fall down, they dust themselves off, they get back up. And then gradually we started thinking of them as sort of deeper beings than that, which I think is true. And then we started thinking about their inner life and realizing that they could be hurt. Kids can be hurt, they can be traumatized. And as we started recognizing that, we sort of thought that and started thinking of all children as extremely vulnerable and as if, once hurt, they will never recover. And I do feel that, kids growing up in extremely, what are they called? Adverse somethings. A terrible childhood is a terrible childhood, and I think does affect you for a long time. I think it can be overcome, but it's no laughing matter. But we started seeing, just like we started seeing more and more danger in the jungle gym, we started seeing more and more hurt from smaller and smaller things. And we started worrying that we started thinking of our children as innately vulnerable as opposed to innately resilient. And, I don't think people should go around bullying kids or hurting kids, but I think we should have some trust that they can, they can get in a fight with a friend, they can get a scraped knee, they can get lost and scared for a little while, and that's maybe a growing experience as opposed to a trauma. And when you start thinking of all children as vulnerable physically, emotionally, and socially, you start thinking that you have to intervene all the time so that because if something bad happens, they will never recover. So there's something that is very pessimistic about the way we see kids. We think of it as being more sensitive to them, but I think it is almost an oversensitivity on our parts that's assuming a fragility that that we sort of inculcate by treating them as fragile. And I'll give you just my favorite examples from Parents Magazine, which had an article on play dates, and it was just answering all these questions about play dates. There were two that were really annoying. One was if your child is about to go on an overnight at a friend's house, and then you find out that the father is divorced and the mother is not home, do you have to let your kids stay overnight? And the magazine said, absolutely not. You're, a dad at home with a kid, forget it. I mean, so I thought that was extremely insulting because that's already assuming that the father is some kind of predator just because the mother isn't home. But the one that I thought was most symbolic was the question, your child is old enough to stay home alone by herself sometimes, like when you go to the dry cleaner, but now she has a play date over. Can you still run your errand? And the magazine said, absolutely not. You want to be there in case, first of all, there's an accident. Of course, they always go to the physical. But also, what if there's a spat? You want to be there to make sure that nobody's feelings get too hurt. So when I talk about thinking of kids as vulnerable, that's exactly what I mean. Kids can have an argument with their friend and get over it without you. And in fact, when they learn to get over it without you, they realize like it's not the end of the world. And look at me, now we're back to playing. I mean, they might not put it in those words, but they have gone through the cycle of being frustrated, angry, and getting themselves out of it, or not, and then waiting till the next day. And life goes on. But if you see that as so traumatic, so indelibly horrible that your child will never feel good again, that you must be there. And Parents Magazine just told you got to be there because otherwise their feelings will get too hurt. You think that everything is hurting them too much. And then you've taken out all the chances for them to grow some calluses or to grow some resilience or some bounce or become, in John Haidt words, actually, it's not just John Haidt, it's also a guy named Nassim Taleb, anti-fragile. There are things that are fragile that break. I don't want to throw this phone on the ground because the glass will break. There are things that if they fall on the ground, nothing bad happens. My pad of paper is still fine. But there are things that are anti-fragile that actually need a little stress testing, a little, tension before they get strong. And one of them is the immune system, which has to get germs so that it builds up the antibodies. And one of them is bones, which actually grows back stronger when they break. And the other system that needs a little bit of friction and a little bit of betrayal and frustration and fear and risk is children. And when you take all that out of kids' lives, it's like taking all the whole grain out of the bread because, that's so crunchy and it's hard to chew and it's brown. Let's just get it all out of there. And it's like pretty soon the nutrients are gone. So you have to give kids some independence, some time away from you, not jumping in if their feelings are hurt and not running over if they scrape their knee and not being, calling them on your phone, honey, you're going the wrong way. Remember, we live to the left. Just giving them some independence so that they build up that anti-fragility that we see lacking in kids today when they feel very anxious. I'd feel anxious too if I'd been told that I couldn't handle anything. Everything was too big and too scary and too hard and too traumatizing for me alone. So we just have to recognize that in our, we've listened to this whole culture that's told us to helicopter and almost enforced it by law and say, forget it. I trust my kids. I trust my community. Even if I live in a dangerous neighborhood, I trust my kid to make dinner for me or to babysit. I mean, there's ways to show your child that you believe in them and not just in you helping them.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.